I'd like to introduce our distinguished guest speaker tonight, Harold Schoeffler. He's going to outline his thoughts in opposition to the proposed I-49 corridor this evening. We thank you for coming out. It's a little cool this evening, but thank you for coming out. Thank you so much. Harold?
I want to thank you all so much for the opportunity to share our views about something very important to the community, and I would stress that a group like this is very, very important to the community because it allows for a free expression of views without being badgered by a lot of economic side interests and so forth. It's allowing people from the bottom up to listen and hear what is being said and respond to the comments. So I welcome, when I finish my comments, your input, because that's super important. You know, it's great to have the real well-educated, well-funded people telling our community how things ought to go. But we have to pay for it, and we have to live with it, and we have to deal with it. And so we certainly have a voice. And so I'll be talking about, mainly I'll focus on the connector and the environmental problems with the connector. And I'll talk a little bit about how I-49 got built anyway. A lot of what you hear about I-49 and so forth is in the terms of, well, we've committed, $50, $100 million to this project. We've bought 50 or 60 properties. This is a done deal. It's going to happen. Well, that was just a done deal just like that in New Orleans called the Dixie Freeway. That $450 million in hand was being built. And this was in the middle 70s. And the Sierra Club in New Orleans, in the state group, said, y'all missed one thing in building this Dixie Freeway. You're building it through a swamp. You're going to impact wetlands forever. You're going to destroy thousands of acres of wetlands. So you should have done an environmental impact study. So they sued in federal court, and the judge ruled, after $60 million has been spent, that the project should have had an environmental impact study, and had a study been done, it should be turned down. And the judge further commented, the money left over here, the almost $400 million left, should be used to build an interstate highway north-south across the state of Louisiana. Now, to build a highway from Shreveport to Lafayette, excluding the little port through Alexandria, was about $350 million. So we're talking about the 5 miles going through town. They're going to be $1 billion, probably a lot more than that. So what are the problems with this thing? Why is it a problem? One of the issues is that it is in one corridor. There's only one path that it takes. Now, the group, we put a group together that looked at, did this satisfy the need in an environmental impact study under the National Environmental Policy Act to render alternatives. The environmental impact study requires that you investigate alternatives on any major project that could impact the environment. So, but this project was all in the same path, roughly going from Willow and coming to the tracks by St. Genevieve's, following the tracks over the bayou, along the railroad tracks, all the way out past Broussard. And the differences in the 6 alternatives were variations in how high and how long the bridges were and so forth, all those issues. Different ramp configurations and different, whether you're going to tunnel under the railroad track or go over it. Those were the alternatives dealt with. In our lawsuit, we contended that it did not. The DOTD did not satisfy the requirement of alternatives, that the project was essentially the same all the way through. DOTD successfully argued that this was the only path, the only alternatives that satisfied the need of safety in transportation. Now, our citizen group or not experts on the needs of transportation and safety and moving, So the judge ruled with DOTD. We appealed it. It went to the Fifth Circuit, and the Fifth Circuit affirmed Judge Doherty's ruling. So what that did was cast in concrete the 6 alternatives. Without that lawsuit, there would have been a little wiggle room that you could have moved it over maybe 4 or 5 blocks and out of the path of some of the problems that I'll discuss further. But now it's cast in federal concrete that is all in that one path. And it is the record of decision that they have to live with. So what's the problem with that path? Well, one of the problems, you start at the airport, you got to push the east-west runway back a little ways. Only about 500 or 600 feet. But it's the end of the runway. After spending 4 years in the Air Force, I learned a little bit about runways. It's the beginning and end of the runway that's most important. It's where the concrete and the base course material is triple what it is down the middle, because that's where the planes impact. So now you're going to put that impact zone on a bridge or on 40 feet of fill. The runway is at 48 feet. The swamp that it's going to go back into is at 8 feet. So you got to fill it 40 feet. Only 500 or 600 feet, but that's runway length. That 40 feet's got to have a slope. It can't be a cliff. And then it crosses Bayou Tortue and Bayou Black. When the Lafayette Vermilion Bayou is going backwards, it's going through Black Bayou to fill the bowl between the Teche and the Coteau Ridge. That's what keeps us from flooding. So if you go alter that main course of waterway where Lafayette floodwater resides, as long as the river is backing up, you could significantly raise water levels in Lafayette, which wouldn't be good news for a lot of people that have homes at precarious levels. And it's such an impact, it goes into another parish, and it goes into Nature Conservancy land. And I think both of those are going to be adverse to doing this. And without it, you got a problem for the project. The next is the landfill right at the University of Surrey. That's an old landfill. It was around when I was a youngster as an altar boy at St. Patrick's Church. And everything went into that. They burned it every day. They didn't cover it. Railroad crap went into that. I mean, everything you can imagine went into it. There's no controls, whatever. When they built the Public Works building, they were delayed about a year trying to find some kind of footing through the old rusted cars and refrigerators and washing machines and everything that was stuck in there for 30, 40 feet down. So it's not, the road's not going to be built on that. But if it's going to be an economic advantage to have this road, it's going to be tough to do anything, build any kind of filling station or business over the old Lafayette landfill. Limited economic opportunity unless you want to clean it up. So the next big thing is the rail yard. And kind of like smoking, you know, when we filed a suit, had we had the decision that was put out by the Fifth Circuit August 28th of 07 involving consolidated companies, had we had that decision, it would have probably been a different issue in the courtroom. But we didn't have that decision, and we didn't have the resources to do the years of testing with expert witnesses and borings and so forth to verify this one issue. The rail yard is seriously contaminated. It was a roundhouse. Every train that went from New Orleans to Houston had to refuel there. They used number 6 bunker fuel. A real cheap, one step below diesel fuel almost. And they were a little sloppy with the way they handled it. The tanks that held it kind of leaked a little bit, but it was only 3 or 4 cents a gallon, so that didn't make a lot of difference. The whole site is saturated with this oil down to the measured 43 feet. Now, they didn't measure deep in that. And the big issue in this, you have VOCs that are part of the number 6 bunker oil. And VOCs are mainly 4 chemical components, benzene, toluene, ethylbenzene, and xylene. They're all highly cancer-causing agents, while every car sold has a charcoal canister, so the air evaporating from the gas tank goes through that and eliminates most of the benzene, not all. So benzene is a well-known hazardous product. And it's always volatile organic compounds, and it's always coming up. So it's on the surface, so when it rains, it washes off, goes into this drainage system, into the volume. Now, all over the site, they've put dams, evidently, to try to limit how much this stuff goes off and where it goes. They had, every train that was overhauled usually had to refurbish the firebox and the boiler tank. All those were surrounded with asbestos. And when they took the train apart, that old asbestos was just dumped in the pit. And there were a bunch of dump pits around the site. And supposedly, according to people who witnessed it, even whole tank cars were dumped in the pits. So there's a lot of stuff in those pits. The old tanks, underground tanks around the site that held this number 6 bunker oil fuel, they're all still there. All the pipes still there. The concrete slabs are all there. A lot of the railroad has old abandoned tracks all over the place with the creosote timbers under them and so forth. So this is a highly contaminated site. It took 9 years of litigation. The posture that Consolidated Companies was in was that when DEQ came into being in '91, they went to Consolidated Companies and said, your site is contaminated. We want you to hire an environmental company to put on at least 6 or 7 monitoring wells. You're going to have to have a report every 3 months on what's in those wells. And after 2 years of monitoring, we want you to come up with a plan of resolving the contaminants on your property. Consolidated comes and said, hold on, that's not ours, that's the railroad's. They said, oh no, you bought it, you have it. You bought it in 1964, so it's yours. So Consolidated Companies in '98 filed a suit and went through 9 years of litigation, very extensive testing about what's there. And key to the decision was, Consolidated Companies argued that it was no use to clean the property because the contaminants would continue to go back into their cleaned up property. And so they had to prove that the rail yard was indeed contaminated. And that's what the decision came down to. Now, these were 2 private companies. We would have liked to have seen a judge say, you got to clean it up, Mr. Union Pacific or Mr. Burlington Northern Santa Fe. It's yours to clean up. But these were 2 private entities, the railroad and Consolidated Companies, and they worked out a silent seal agreement. Nobody knows what that is. May be able to find out what it is. But it resulted in a settlement. So the fact that it's contaminated in the case, the judge makes a statement that there's very poor information. Even though the testing done by Consolidated Companies he felt was inadequate, grossly inadequate, because one of the biggest questions was, is this material reaching Lafayette's Chico Aquifer water? We have wells in proximity of it. And that question wasn't answered. And our Louisiana DEQ issued a no further action letter, essentially saying that everything's okay, just don't disturb it, leave it alone. And the judge, in his opinion, said he thought that was issued because there was no proof that the Chico Aquifer was being impacted by the contaminants at the site. So this is kind of like smoking. You know, until you got into a court of law and proved that smoking was an issue that injured your health, there's not too much that could be done about it. And we couldn't say that the railroad yard is contaminated unless we had some kind of proof. Now, to do that took 9 years of testing and court actions and quite a court history. But the real problem is that the project goes right through it. And the project includes 4 tunnels, 4 underpasses, including the Jefferson Street underpass, which is only 14 feet. Well, the new railroad standards is around 22, 25. So we got to go deeper, which will extend the underpass almost to Dwyer's, all the way to the President Evangeline Thruway. Johnson Street will be an enormous underpass where the access ramps will be circular and it will be underground. Now, one of the problems with that is, first of all, if you're just digging up dirt and hauling it away, you know, you're talking about $10 a yard to do that. If you're digging up contaminated, saturated soil with number 6 bunker oil, you got to bring it to a hazardous waste site. It has to be manifested. And you're talking about $1,200 a ton, and a yard is about 2 tons, so you're about $2,500, $3,000 a yard. So the price of the project is going to go up astronomically in terms of getting rid of that waste. And then you put this tunnel, this underpass is going to go about 30 feet down, and so it's about 38 feet right there, so you're 8 feet above sea level. The bayou comes to 16.9. They want to drain it to the bayou, which means they'll have to pump it. Now, with this cliff going through all this hazardous waste, you're going to continuously have this hazardous waste bleed into the tunnel that you pump it out and dump it in the bayou. So these are major issues that you're just going to have a hell of a time getting around. The next big environmental problem is our own Grant Street power plant. It was Lafayett's first power plant. It's on the corner of Simcoe and Grant Buchanan. It's got monitoring wells all over it. You can walk around and look at the big monitoring wells. Why do you put monitoring wells? Because you got a real pollution problem. No reason other that you would do that. That operated from 1897 to 1951. So it's been there, 65, 66, 64 years. And Lafayette hadn't cleaned it up yet. It's all busted up concrete and pilings and big fence around it. Says no trespassing high voltage, although you can't see a wire anywhere around it. It goes across the street. It's highly contaminated. When Anderson Furniture wanted to borrow money to rebuild their store, the banks are getting smart on this issue. Oh, wait a minute, you're on really high contaminated site. We can't lend money. So the city worked out some kind of settlement, and Anderson didn't have to sell furniture anymore. It's probably cheaper to pay them off than to try to deal with fixing the problem. But that's our problem. The wells that we drink from is right across the street from the old Grant Street power plant. This is an area of the community that this project promises to clean up and revive economically. There's nothing you can do economically with a contaminated site but clean it up. It threatens our water system. And by the way, you think, well, the city ought to be testing for benzene, toluene, ethylbenzene, and xylene. These are real bad critters. But the city's testing program doesn't require a test for that. How neat. Simcoe is going to have a tunnel. And it's going right through that contaminated site, right through our water processing plant. One of the monitoring wells is 50 feet from the water processing plant's fence. So in all this, we're going to come and build a highway. And we're going to improve all this economically. And this is an area that the city has ignored. The city put their own monitoring wells right on the corner of Chestnut and 6th, right across the street from the Salvation Army in 1990. That's part of the proceedings here, and found out how bad it was, and the city just backed off. No, so you have a situation where I'm amazed litigation has moved forward on it, but offended property owners are certainly in the same posture that consolidated companies are in. And the first lawsuit it hits, they'd probably quarantine the property, which means the end of any way that you could put a highway across it. And that'll come, just as sure as I'm standing here. So you got a bad site for a project. You got another big problem by marrying this project to the railroad. Their specifications are quite different from DOTD specifications on height clearance, on depth clearance. So we married to all those regulations. We married to all the FAA regulations. The glide path, the east-west runway is interrupted by the elevated Surrey and University Extension overpass. This thing is poorly designed, and the cost is astronomical. The federal highway system, the interstate highway system, would fund an interstate at about $15 to $20 million a mile. This is $200 to $300 million a mile. They talk about, we're going to raise it to 60 feet so that the sunlight will reach the ground. When you deal with going up 60 feet, you have this ramp. The grades are 4%. So each 4 feet, you got to go out 100 feet. So if you go out 60 feet, your ramps are 1,500 feet out. That's 5 blocks. There won't be any more downtown. You're going to cover it with ramps. Your Second Street, Third Street underpass. That's an enormous underpass. It's going to go out just like the one on Jefferson Street. According to railroad standards, it's going to go out 300, 400 feet. It's going to go a block and a half or more. And so all of this is an awful lot of expense, a lot of disruption, and a lot of risk to our drinking water. When the water runs off of the railroad site, gets in the bayou, it lands in our oysters, it lands on our crabs, it lands on our crawfish ponds, and right back on our table. Benzene, toluene, all these things that are known cancer-causing agents. This makes this project an environmental disaster. They even try to put it where it is. And the record of decision requires that it go right there, and the suit that was filed by the citizen almost demands that the judge agrees that's the only alternatives that meet the standards of safety and transportation. So the whole thing is a problem. There's a myth that we're going to go out and reclaim this and make it an economically prosperous area like River Ranch. That's a myth. And the people who have been dealing with Lafayette as a community for the 50 or 60 years that they've ignored the railroad, ignored their own power plant, and stuck this community with hazardous waste sites right under their homes and businesses. That's all still there. And the banks, again, have gotten smart. They figured this all out. They're not going to lend you money to put a business over hazardous waste material. So with that, I'll kind of close and say, good luck to the guys that have the $21 billion to make this happen and convince you guys that this is a great project for the community. It'll be the entity corridor and all the fluff that you hear about. So thank you, and I'll answer questions.
I'll have our president, ask the first question or two, but we invite questions. We ask you instead of shooting from the hip. We appreciate you coming up to the mic because we're running on the AOC and YouTube, and Mr. Gauthier does a good job of doing that, so we'd appreciate you coming up to the mic.
Thank you again for appearing, giving your presentation. This project, I-10 corridor, was born 1987 or before. There's been a lot of discussion amongst the Lafayette Chamber of Commerce, Lafayette Consolidated Government, virtually every group in town. I don't know how involved the individuals were, but I remember years ago, probably in early 2000s, I was at a meeting where there was 500 people, mostly in favor of the project and moving forward with the project. There was opposition, and the opposition has been vocal and persistent. And from what I understand, there was a lot of interest in the environmental concerns that you have, because we all want to live environmentally safe community, drink good water. And I understood that a 12-year environmental impact study was completed in 2002 before the record of decision was made. And I know the lawsuit was filed shortly after the record of decision. And I would ask you, were the environmental issues that you raised today considered in that lawsuit, or are there new issues?
In our lawsuit, we did mention that the railroad site had issues of contamination, but we didn't have the verification or proof, and we didn't have the resources to bring that issue into prominence in the litigation.
I understand more recently the federal government has issued a grant, 18-month grant, with reference to outreach and an engagement program which started in October 2015 to mitigate or to lessen the potential destructive urban infrastructure plight that is going to have in the downtown area. Have you and the Sierra Club participated in any of the outreach or engagement meetings, and what constructive recommendations have you made, or the Sierra Club made, to make the corridor more friendly or more of a community connector rather than a concrete albatross?
I do serve on the community committee, and the first two meetings was about an hour and a half of I guess consultants from Phoenix, from Boston, from around the world. They showed us pretty slideshows and pretty much told us, you're going to be the advocates that's going to go out to the community and tell the community how great this is. Now there's 50 people on the committee. The first committee meeting was 25. The second was 24, and the third was 14. So I think people have gotten the sense that this community is not going to run out and sell a bill of goods to its fellow citizens. You know, this project has some major environmental problems, and to assume that we're going to select a committee of 50 citizens and give well-rehearsed and presentations made by very well qualified engineers and consultants from around the country and sell us on the idea that we should go out and tell the rest of this community that we need to build consensus and get everybody on board because the time clock is ticking and we have to hurry and get this thing done. Now nobody's saying where the money's going to come from, and you hear, oh, we're going to make it a toll road. Wow. The toll in New Orleans, I think, is $27 a car one way. Minimum toll will be $5. You imagine a kid living in your area going to UL, going to have to pay a fortune just to ride to school every day. They'll have to move to Lafayette. So, yeah, I think, you know, $21 million has gone out to a consulting group, or I don't know if it's tax money or private money, to try to convince this community that this is a great thing. And I don't think this community is ready to be convinced.
Thank you, Harold. Questions at this time? Jay?
Good evening, gentlemen, ladies and gentlemen. Ed Abel. I've been an advocate of the program for a long time, but Harold, you told us a lot of the problems. Question number one is, what's the answer? We would just give up on this road and not have a highway and have this continued blight of the Evangeline Thruway through our town. What do you want to do now?
Got it. A few years ago, I guess right around 2000, I was on the Mississippi River Corps of Engineers, the Mississippi 5, which is a luxury yacht that runs on our tax dollars. And it entertains politicians. This is a tug that runs the Mississippi. It sleeps about 400 people. It's got fabulous kitchens and dining rooms and meeting rooms, and you cruise in the river, you know, taking in the sights and inspecting the low water conditions. Nobody's looking out the windows, I can guarantee you. But the best part of the trip is they have an ice cream maker down in the kitchen. And those that have been on the trips are down there dipping into the ice cream. And I'm having ice cream there, and there's the Secretary of DOTD. He says, "Here, when you guys are going to get things together in Lafayette and deal with I-49 and getting it going?" I said, "What's the problem?" He says, "Cost." He says, "We can get $1 billion to build a Lafayette from I-10 to Boutique. But if we can't do this project, if we spend $2 or $3 billion getting through Lafayette, we need to find a way around Lafayette." And so with that, I'm talking to, a few days later, I'm talking to Pierce Melton. And he was a prominent person, an architect in this community, and did a lot of work in this community, especially saving trees. He was an advocate of saving oak trees and planting more. So Pierce said, "Well, is there a way to go around Lafayette?" "Yeah, I think there is." He said, "Without going through the swamps?" I said, "Yeah, you couldn't go through the swamps. That's, would be environmentally negative and very, very expensive, because the elevation is only 8 feet, and you'd have to raise it up to around 25 feet. So you'd bridge it. So very expensive and very environmentally negative." But I said, "You got the Tesh Ridge. You can go up on the Tesh Ridge. That's only 5 miles east of Lafayette. Kind of like Highway 90 from New Iberia. Highway 90 is 6 miles from the main street of New Iberia, but it seems like New Iberia has done all right with the highway bypass in that community, so to speak." So we, got out with a GPS and driving Sarah's old convertible. We went and spent one Sunday afternoon laying out a plot. And I was friendly with Clifford Smith, and he's the head of T. Baker Smith, an engineering firm in Houma. He got all, when I told him about it, he got all excited. He said, "We'll kind of do some preliminary engineering for you." So they laid out the plan. They laid out the acreage, the number of crossings and intersections and this whole project, and estimated cost. The main interest for Clifford Smith was hurricane evacuation for the 50,000 people that live south of the intercoastal and Terrebonne Parish that now have to head towards Lafayette, that has been stuck on the highway, from almost Generate to Lafayette for 8 or 10 hours just to get through Lafayette. So Lafayette's the big problem. So to do this project would be 27 miles. It replaces 21 miles of the Thruway. It would cost $410 million. It can be done in 2 years. It's all at grade. Goes through no wetlands. It's kind of a no-brainer. You'd still have the Evangeline Thruway. And with that, you'd have the money there. For $700-800 million, you could upgrade the Evangeline Thruway. It's a boulevard. They've already acquired most of the homes in the middle. So turn that into boulevard space, to a park, urban areas, so to speak, and put overpasses over 167 and Pinhook and a few others, and really beautify that. At the same time, you'd get the railroad and the city to clean up that mess, so our drinking water would be safe. Yeah, we've given a lot of thought. We have that whole engineering plan in hand.
Well, back in the 80s, I know you were part of the process because you were arguing about the same thing you're saying right now, that we ought to go on the Tesh Ridge or we ought to go west. And there was a concerted effort to bring a number of engineering firms in to decide where could we go and what is the only effective way to do it. And all of those issues were considered. Well, I presume they were considered in the litigation that you tried the case. Say, I don't want it where it is right now, and you lost. And the Fifth Circuit affirmed it and said, that's it. It's going to go here.
That's right.
That's right. Okay. So now, if we don't build it there, you know we're never going to have one, don't you? It's never going to happen. Or maybe not in your lifetime or mine for sure. Maybe nobody else in here. Some of you may be young enough to live 50 years, but you know that. Isn't that the fact?
No,
if you stop this road now, you know it never will be built. Is that right?
I don't agree with you at all. First of all, the funding for an interstate highway, a new highway, is available at 15 to 20 million a mile. This project outline is 17 million a mile. It's within the funding where you don't have to make it a toll road. If you can do it in 2 years, you still have the Evangeline Thruway. Now, the road is designed so that during hurricane evacuation, this is a 4-lane road with complete service roads over the whole area. 6 of the lanes would be turned to hurricane evacuation. We only have 3 now. So that would give us a total of 9 lanes for this traffic to leave. And another big issue in this, you know, when the oil industry shuts down in the Gulf, you have 35,000 employees land at Grand Isle and Port Fourchon and you name it, that are getting out of harm's way, and they're all driving little trucks and cars. They're part of the traffic jam. So hurricane evacuation is the concern that justifiably T. Baker Smith and Clifford Smith had. They worried about their constituents, and I believe Lafayette has to think beyond our own selfish needs. We're dealing with a very important issue to many of our fellow citizens who live in harm's way down the coast. One more question.
My appreciation is that all of these arguments and all of these options for different places to put the road and all of the environmental issues were presented to Judge Melanson in the federal court here in Lafayette in 2002, and he rejected it, wrote an 18-page opinion considering all of the arguments. Rejected it, and the Fifth Circuit says the road goes where the Federal Highway Department says, and so the footprint is there. If we don't build it there, we have to start all over, and it's taken us about 40 years to get here. Is that accurate?
No, we really didn't. We just in our legal arguments said that the alternatives were inadequate. We didn't offer any solution. And the DOTD looked at 2 roadways through the swamps. They looked at 2 possibilities to the west. And you look at interstate, you know, I-49 goes north-south. And it turns, Highway 90 turns to the southeast. So if you go to the west, you're going almost 40 miles around. And if you go through the Tesh Ridge, you're only going 27 miles. So the distance is significantly less. Going to the west, one proposal had 17 major interchanges. There's only 4 on the Tesh Ridge. So it is a cost-effective way to go around. That was never presented to the court.
Hi, Ella Arsamon. When was the last contamination test done? And if I heard right, it was very hard to hear you because of the door opening and everything. Did you mention that they didn't go deep enough to test it? You know, I don't think anyone is opposed to building things and bettering our road system for all people outside of Lafayette and stuff, but my concern is the safety and the health of the people who are going to be drinking the water and living in the areas and stuff. That's very scary to me.
The tests were conducted by several groups, the DEQ, the EPA, the City of Lafayette. They were done from around 91 to about 2003. To my knowledge, 2003 was the last test. There were test wells put down by DEQ in residential areas. There were 6 of them. And there were other off-site test areas that were not residential. And I don't know exactly what that means. And there were 6 of those wells. And they all showed very high levels of contamination. But they only tested to 43 feet. That was the deepest wells. And this case expresses the concern that the sand, the water-bearing sand is at 50 feet. And tests should have been done to at least 50 feet to the water-bearing sand.
I'm a visual person, so I'm curious to know if there's a website or something that we can see that shows the plan that the government, consolidated government, has put together, where this is going to go, and your plan. Compare it side by side. And has there been a lot of coverage in the newspaper about this? Because I'm ashamed to tell you, I haven't been keeping up with the newspaper.
All right, the plan for DOTD is well published, is available. Our plan we can certainly make available. We're very willing to share it. It's not a complicated plan. We think the easiest thing to do there's a portion of the plan that's our plan that's about 7 miles that goes from Carencro to Burbridge. That can be totally eliminated. And that would leave only about 21 miles, and a cost of about $350 million to do that. We spent $167 million on the J-turns. For a few more nickels, we could have gotten a highway that would resolve a lot of the problems. And, you know, they call this an energy corridor, and that's kind of an interesting commentary, because I kind of feel it's a sugarcane corridor more, especially in sugarcane season.
To answer that real quick, there is a website, it's LafayetteConnector.com.
Come up.
You have to come up,
You need to come to the mic, please.
like everybody else.
Is this a done deal?
It is just as done as the Dixie Freeway in New Orleans.
There is a website, it's LafayetteConnector.com, and all of the historical documents are on that website, including Path to Progress, which actually had all of the studies that that went through Tesh Ridge as well as the Loop, and identified Evangeline Thruway as the best path. So if you, and there's also our first community workshop is January 23rd at the Progressive Church on a community church on Evangeline Thruway, and that is the first of over 40 workshops that we're doing within the community. The first one's a vision and values workshop, and then there are also going to be charrettes and design charrettes, and really this process at this point is to understand what the community wants from this roadway and understand our vision and our needs as a community, and the goal is to design what the community would like from the corridor. The other thing that it's important to understand is that this is this highway goes, it is the part of the I-49 Go South initiative, which is I-49 South all the way to New Orleans, and it goes all the way up to Missouri, I believe. So it is a federal highway, and basically they're missing these 5 miles. It's an important highway for our transportation system, not only in Louisiana, not only in Lafayette, but across the United States. Thank you.
Go ahead, Judge.
Thank you. I'm asking this question on behalf of several people around my table. We have some confusion, and this goes back to the exchange between you and the gentleman who was referring back to the court decision. Have I understood correctly that your alternative solution was never part of that court decision? So the court decision has no bearing at all, would not, or at least would not preclude going ahead with this alternative. That's my first question to you. And the second question is, as far as you're concerned, do you feel like if this particular a proposal is not adopted, that would mean this much needed highway could never be completed? Or do you think that stopping this particular proposal still leaves the door open to some other ways of getting the road that we need for hurricane evacuation?
DOTD argued in the case that they had considered 2 east and 2 west alternatives. And they argued that the expense to the west was astronomically high and disruptive, and the 2 routes through Cypress Island Swamp was environmentally damaging. And no one spoke about a Test Ridge route. Those were the arguments made by DOTD, and we had not even designed it at that time. So that was not an argument that could be brought into court. It was not. We just said the alternatives considered were inadequate, and DOTD successfully argued that this was the only alternatives that met the needs of transportation and safety. And so by court order, they're stuck with these things that go right through the hazardous waste sites. And if litigation hits it, well, we think one of the first things that happen, somebody will ask for a quarantine, and they'll fence the area, and as many hazardous waste sites are quarantined. And I think the goal, if there is any litigation, would be to force BNSF to clean up the railroad. They've cleaned them up all over the country, and Lafayette deserves to have that site cleaned up to protect our drinking water and a lot of other issues. The VOCs are airborne contaminants. They're constantly going into the air, into the hundreds of homes and the lungs of people living around it. So this is not something that you can wash away and wipe away. And interesting that all the newspaper articles that have been written, none of them have touched this subject of contamination. It's kind of, it's a sleeping dog, let it lie. Let's play into the hands of the railroad. We don't want to wake up that dog, let's leave it alone. And I'm almost convinced that that site was planned to take care of that very expensive problem for the railroad.
Harold, would the contamination that you're talking about evaporate if we don't build the road? Or is it going to be there anyway?
This is contaminated soil. There's only one way to clean it, is to pick it up and move it. We know it's 43 feet down in the limited test wells. This is a result of about, at best, maybe 30 test wells over 30 acres. It doesn't tell the whole story by any means. But if you take it 43 feet down, you're right at $100 million an acre to clean it up. About $3 billion to haul that crap to Morgan City. So that's what the railroad's trying to avoid.
If the answer is no, then we still be there?
If you picked it up and hauled it away, we'd be gone. Theoretically, you remove the soil. This happens all over the country. And the biggest issue around the country is contaminated filling station sites. We built fiberglass tanks that every morning somebody dropped about a 10-foot pole to the bottom and knocked holes in them all over the country. So even around Lafayette, we have a bunch of these contaminated sites. The Exxon station at the corner of Pinhook and Surrey. It's estimated that clean up that one site, which is probably a quarter acre, would be around $500,000.
Hello, everyone. Just really quickly, I wanted to go back to the lady's question in the back and the pink fuchsia sweater in regards to whether or not the other options had been considered. Well, I just wanted to kind of shed some clarification on that. And I'm sorry, my name is Deidre Druette. I handle public affairs for DOTD here in the Lafayette area. And I don't want to respond too much because we'll come back on January 18th to talk about some things regarding DOTD, but usually the way we handle a process is before we start any project, we have different stages that we go through before any project comes to, I guess you could say, comes to life, shall I say. The first thing that we have to do is what's done is called a feasibility study, and those the other two options that that's been referred to, the Tesh Ridge option or the Western Loop. All of that was done through a feasibility study, which Kathy mentioned earlier through that Paths to Progress study. And so because those were done in the feasibility study, those options were not considered in order to help address the need to address some of the concerns that we were having or the challenges that we needed to meet along the Evangeline Thruway. So I did want to point that out, and like I said, we can discuss that further when we come back on January the 18th, but there are different stages that we go through. So we look at the different concepts. So if there is a particular route and we do a feasibility on that particular route, if we see that we cannot move forward on that particular route, then it will not go to the next stage, which of course is the environmental stage.
My name is Jackie LeBlanc, and I'm a resident of Lafayette, Louisiana since 1940. My family is from this area. I want to say that anything that will harm our water, our God-given gift, should be avoided. When I see on TV, when I bathe in the morning, when I drink water, when I use water, when I turn the faucet on, I say, thank you, God. Can you imagine how it would be if we did not have the water that we have now? When I see boiled water notices for some of our surrounding towns, my thoughts are, poor things. Poor things. And they have water that looks like dirt coming out of their faucets. So by all means, I don't care where you put the road connector. I don't know that much about it. I know nothing about it. But for heaven's sakes, avoid messing with our water. It's necessary. Thank you.
That states the bottom line very well. And this case, as stated by the judge, that whole issue wasn't tested either with Conco or Georgia Pacific property or the railroad property. It's something that should absolutely be tested. We tend to think, you know, we're a big city. We're not going to have any problems with water. Big cities don't have those problems. Look up the record of Phoenix, Arizona, where a town of over 1 million people had their water contaminated by a solvent that Motorola was dumping into waste pits that went right into the groundwater, caused an outrageous number of leukemia victims amongst children. And it was that outbreak of leukemia that finally, after years of testing, discovered the culprit was the solvents Motorola was using in their equipment. Now, they are cleaning that aquifer by pumping a spray into the air, because this solvent easily evaporates. So it's going to take 30 years to clean that aquifer, and meanwhile, they're getting water from about 30 miles away at great expense to the citizens of Phoenix, Arizona. So don't think it can't happen. It has happened around the country.
Thank you, Harold. Ed Goche, which does all the filming for us, and he does a great job. He has a question. Do you have that turned on? You want to make sure? Oh, okay.
Okay. I've never built a road. I'm certainly not an engineer. I deal with video. If you don't mind, let's play What If. let's take Larry's idea. In between the lanes on I-49, there's a lot of space in between. Okay, we make it all flat, we cement it in, there's no deep tunnels, there's no bridges, just flat. Tell me what the impact would be.
You would need several overpasses, and I think they envisioned 4, one at Pinhook, one at the 167, one at the, I think at Willow, and I think one more. I don't know exactly what it is, but that's the proposal that was brought to the legislature by Representative Terry Landry, and he was high pressured into withdrawing it by prominent members of this community who threatened to run someone against him and force him out of office. Well, he withdrew it, the study plan, and they still had somebody run against him. I don't know if it was connected, but so anyway, but he is now, I think, going to be very active in the Legislative Transportation Committee.
We have time for a question. All right. One gentleman coming up, yeah.
Thank you. Harold, I don't know much about the expanse of the Tesh Ridge, but I do know that one of the concerns of people is that the economic center of gravity may move toward a highway on the Tesh Ridge. Can you explain to us if there is adequate property at that level to actually move businesses there, or is that so narrow that it's economically unfeasible for businesses to do that?
If you take off from the, if you just excluded the first 5 miles from King Road Bridge and you took it down I-10, 4.8 miles to just before the scales, then you would be following an old rail corridor. It's a federal corridor that goes all the way to St. Martinsville. And in 1873, when they built that railroad, those engineers knew where the high water was because they didn't have levees to protect trains in those days. So they found the high spot, and about 400 acres of the 1,200 acres we would need is a federally owned right-of-way. Now, a lot of right-of-ways in railroads were easements, so when the railroad moved, the property reverted back to the landowner. But in some cases, they were federally owned right-of-way, and that's the case on that section, and this project would utilize that right-of-way. So it does have a lot of room. This project will cost, the corridor connector will cost 1,200 jobs. It'll take out a bunch of businesses, Dependable Dodge. You can go down a long list of businesses that would go out. Nearly all the filling stations from Willow to the airport, including the airport filling station, would be taken out. So I don't know where we'd be getting gas. I guess we'll find a station somewhere. But it's having an enormous impact on business. It takes out, according to the EIS, about 1,000 homes. But of course, these are ramshackle old shotgun houses, you know, and the jobs they're taking are not, you know, oil center, river ranch jobs. They're kind of low-paid filling station attendants and, you know, automobiles, parts houses jobs. But I can guarantee you to those people, that job running a filling station is super important to them. That guy that lives in a shotgun house that might be 700 or 800 feet, that's his castle. You're going to pay him $20,000 to move out? And then what you going to do? What is he going to do? The project we're talking about will take not one home. It takes about 50 structures, barns, and so forth. It moves about 10 trailers. It will not take one business or one job. If this is an economic opportunity and you take out 1,000 jobs, we have just lost 5,000 jobs. And this project is going to take 1,000 jobs. That ain't easy to replace, I can assure you. So going under Tesh Ridge has minimal cost, minimal impact on people's homes, has no, it's all wide open country. It doesn't go through any town. It totally avoids Parks, St. Martinsville, Cade. It's all wide open country and mostly pastured, all farmland, no woodland involved. It totally avoids the wetlands. Right at Lake Martin, it's easily visible. Over the Ruth Canal, there's a bridge. You can see where it crosses, where the High Line right-of-way goes through that 100-foot right-of-way. So it's pretty easy to see where it's going to go. Thank you.
Well, Harold, you've done a very good job, and we certainly owe a round of applause for what he's going to do.
Again, thank you, Carol, and thank you all for being here. And this is so important that people from the bottom up voice their concerns and issues. Top-down management is what ran General Motors broke. I was a Cadillac dealer for a long time, and we'd go to these super meetings, how great the cars are going to be and how rich you're going to be, but they never wanted to hear a thing from us at the bottom. This is a community that should say, we want to be heard from the bottom up, and we don't want something from the top down rammed down our throats. So thank you all for being here.
And if you want a piece of cake, there's a lot of cake we put in at another table outside, so you're more than welcome to have that, and we'd love to have it. So the meeting stands adjourned, and thank you all for coming out this evening.